we need to chapter what is Burp Suite Pro? Do I really need it? Because I've been asked this question a lot, Uncle Red. Do I really need to get Burp Suite Pro, or is the Community Edition fine? Well, in my opinion, the Community Edition is fine. You don't need it in a sense that you don't really need to eat French fries. You don't really need to have super nice clothes. You just need to have clothes. You need to have food. You need to have the Burp Community Edition to hack a little bit, in my opinion. But the Burp Suite Pro Edition is so much better, and it offers so much extra features for you guys. There are some general advantages that everybody can take advantage of. And that's of course going to be very important in this matter, because there are some more business to business advantages as well, which we'll get into later. But first, the general advantages. The biggest advantage for me is that I can save my project. This is very, very important for me because I am a full-time dad. I have a job. So for me, hunting is not something that I get to do for hours and hours and hours on end like I used to before. I usually get to attack my target for 1 to 2 hours at a time, and when I do that, I have to make sure that I don't have to set up my target's attack strategy, that I don't have to set up my whole infrastructure for attacking every single time. That setup costs me time, especially for me, as you'll guys see on later on as well. There are some things that I always do when I start up Burp Suite, and those things are very important to me. Every single project has them, and I really cannot compromise on those. So setting that up takes a while. It takes 5, 10, 15 minutes even, and I really don't want to spend that time every single time just setting up my project. So that's really important for me, that I can save my project, not just for my target tab, for my scope, but also for some other settings, which we'll get into later on. There are some other advantages as well. For example, the intruder can be used at full speed. That's important. If you have to use the intruder at the throttled speed and at the throttled amount of requests, it's going to be a lot harder to find the good vulnerabilities. So you can only make up to 100 requests per attack, apparently, in the Community Edition. That's not a lot. And the severity of the rate limiting is also very important. So if you get the Pro version, that's going to help you out there. And what's also really cool is that there are some really good word lists built into the intruder by Portwigger, and that are only available in the Pro version as well. Those are some really decent word lists, and I use them quite a lot. I have my own, of course, as well. Content discovery, guys, it's an amazing tool that you only get in the Pro version. Content discovery is like directory brute forcing on steroids. It's a great tool. It has an amazing built-in word list. So definitely worth it, in my opinion. Besides that, there's also access to a host of other useful engagement tools, so we'll look at some more of those later. And we can search our whole project. If we click the burp thing here, we have a search option. This is not available in the Community Edition either. This is super useful, guys, really, really useful. And besides that, there's also the Burp Collaborator client. You have Burp Collaborator and Infiltrator clients. Those are very useful, that you have your own, that you don't need to share them with other people, because in the Community Edition you also have access to the Burp Collaborator client, of course, but you need to have the public version. There is no private version in the Community Edition, which makes it worthwhile, in my opinion, to have. But I really want you to look at these things and ask yourself, do I need them? Do I really need these things to make my experience good? If you really need them, then maybe that $400 or something, I don't know how much it is per year, but that amount might not be that much money, especially if you find 1 or 2 bounties with the extra functionalities that you have. There's also other things like a host of cool extensions. I've made a separate chapter on that, which we'll get into later on as well. Now, for small businesses, suppose you own a small business. You might want to get these automated scans as well. For bug bounty hunters, it's going to be a lot less relatable, in my opinion, because a lot of targets, they say no automatic scanning is allowed, so that falls out of the boat. Also, as a bug bounty hunter, I don't think these automatic scans return as useful of vulnerabilities as they will in a pen testing scenario. That is because in a pen testing scenario, you'd be the first to a target. We are often the very last people to attack a target. So that means that we have to find some more hidden vulnerabilities. And those are often more easy to miss by a scanner, in my opinion. That's why I say that these scanner results, they might not be as important on other things. Now, you do get some really cool information here. You might get some things like vulnerable jQuery version detected, but I found that usually it's very hard to actually find something to abuse this, because, for example, this specific CVE talks about regular expressions in jQuery.html pre-filter. They have to use that specific function before we can actually do any cross-site scripting, so it's not always easy to execute. Now, suppose you have some CI/CD processes set up, that you have an automatic pipeline to which you deploy your production application, to which you deploy your testing application. You might want to have Burp do those automatic scans in your CI/CD pipeline. That's not in the professional edition. There's another edition called let me see real quick, an enterprise edition. I have to put it right. And that's going to have that CI/CD integration plus a whole range of other options I'm not going to get into today. That's a little bit outside of the scope of this specific course, in my opinion. Onto the Burp Suite dashboard. This has a lot of useful functions, and that's what you've been staring at the whole time as well. You can see here, first of all, that my task execution is paused. If you have Burp Suite Pro and you have these tasks running, or even the Community Edition, it's always going to do that if you have that option enabled. So I'm going to resume my scanning tasks. If you don't see your sitemap filling up in here, that's going to be because your tasks are not capturing. They might be off like this, or they might be paused. Let's see if I can, no, I cannot. You can also click here, of course. So if it is on this, that's also paused. That's also something you have to look at. So there's a lot of things you have to check, of course, very important. So after starting up, this is what we see. The first thing that I always look at is my event log. If I have failures, if I am not capturing my traffic properly, if there's something going wrong, it's probably going to be described in here what's going wrong, like proxy service could not start or authentication failures. There might be many different things that happen, and they can all come into the event log. Also, if you write a custom extension, you might be able to write events yourself. So that might also be found in here. Now for the scans part, in here we have a few different types of scans. We have a crawling type of scan, we have a crawl and audit, and we have an audit selected items. The audit selected items is only available from different context menus, which we'll get into later. But for now, we can click the new scan button. And in here, we see the crawl and audit and the crawl functionality. Now, there's a difference between those two. Crawling a website allows Burp to automatically scan it. It's going to go through the whole website, collect anything that looks like a URL, try to serve to it, and add it to the list. Simple as that. It's going to try to click on every single URL that it sees. And then the auditing part, of course, is very, very simple. For auditing itself, it's just trying to look at what it gathered at all of those web pages. And you can have your passive audits and you can have your active audits, also known as static or dynamic. And the difference between those two is that a static one is not going to execute any code. If you do a static audit, it's just going to look at all of the data that's on there, and it's going to try and see if there are any vulnerabilities programmed into that specific website, into that specific JavaScript file, whatever it may be. It's going to look for vulnerabilities in there based on some expressions. And then you can also just crawl, of course. You can enter your URLs that you want to crawl in here, and you can scan your different protocols. That's all very simple. I don't need to cover too much of that. I think people will know this stuff. What's really interesting though is your scan configurations, and you have your crawl and audit and your crawl, and by default your scan is going to run and it's going to run pretty obtrusively in my opinion. So what you can do is add a scan configuration, and you can add one or multiple scan configurations in here, or you can add your own. Now if we select from library, we see that there are quite a few built in already. In here we can do things like, for example, we can say we don't want JavaScript analysis because that can take a long time, so we can select that option and then bam, it's suddenly going to skip all of the JavaScript files. We can say that we want a really heavy scan as well, so audit coverage thorough or even audit coverage maximum. We can add both, but it's going to take the highest one, of course, and these rules are kind of conflicting, so try not to add those. That might give you some conflicting things in your results as well. So we can add quite a lot of them in here. We can add a lot of these built-in ones, or we can add some of our own. And in there we have some crawling and auditing options, as you can see, which is the same thing in here. We have auditing options and crawling strategies. We can do the same thing. We can add a crawling strategy, and if we want to enable any one of these options, for example crawl optimizations, we have to click it open, and now this is going to be enabled. So we can say we want an optimization of a link depth of 5 max, for example, and then we can see in here that we have those options set, and we have a crawl strategy that's being set, which we can also put to custom, but we're not going to do that. But as you can see, you can customize this very, very, very deeply. And then we can save that to our library as well, which means that we can reuse that later on. We can now select that one from our library, as you guys can see here. Going to delete it again. We can also import stuff in here. We can move things up or down in this list. The order really matters, the order that you put things in, especially if you have conflicting things. It's going to really matter which order they are in. It might also just help for you to sort things out a little bit better. You can put things up or down to put them together. Now you can also import a lot of these. We're not going to do that right now because I don't have any configuration files ready. But that's about it for the scan configurations. So then we can also give it some credentials which it can use to log in. This is possible, and Burp will try to look for those specific login forms, and it will enter those credentials. Now you can of course again save them to library. So if I have label test, there we go, I can save that to library with a configuration name of test, and then I can select those credentials from my library again. So really useful. I can either use login credentials or I can use the recorded login sequences, but I do need Burp's Chrome extension for that. That's pretty new, and this is also pretty restrictive, so I would use this one for now, but I would certainly explore it for sure. Then you of course have your resource pool as well. Here we need to select how many concurrent requests we want to make, if we want to have a delay between those requests, how many of those resources we have available, etc. And we can either select an existing resource pool or we can create a new one. If we create a new resource pool, it's going to be available in our project, of course. So that's about it for the scans. We pick which type of scan we want to do, we pick how thoroughly we want it, we pick some options, we set a login, we pick which resource pool we want for it, and then we go. Then we just run. Of course we need to define some URLs to scan as well, otherwise it will not run. But then it's going to open a new window in your scan tasks. So that's all pretty basic. There are some cool things in there like saving to library, but I think we've covered most of the basics there. You also have live tasks, and that is live scanning, which means that every single time a request is going to come in into one of these specific tools, the proxy, the repeater, or the intruder, it's going to do a live audit, either a predefined task from this list or a live passive crawl. Whichever you pick, The URL scope can be everything, suite scope or custom scope, of course. And you can also ignore duplicate items. Sometimes, for example, you make 500 requests to a logging server. Well, we don't want to keep making those requests, of course, so we can deduplicate them, and that's going to remove them from our task list. We can also, again, pick the same scan configurations. They're going to be a little bit different here because, of course, live scanning has a different principle. It's not going to do any scanning itself. You're going to have to feed it the requests. So the principle is a little bit different. You cannot set up as much in here, but you can specify certain things in here. Again, save to library is an option here. We can have a resource pool. And that is about it for this. So then we have our live tasks ready. No, we're not going to update right now, mister. Thank you very much. There's also the issue activities, which you can see up here, which we already looked at a little bit. You can see specifically your issue types. I haven't found anything useful in here. If you guys have, please tell me, because I haven't found anything useful in here. This is not stuff that for me is useful. If it is, it's going to be at least a high severity, but for a pen tester, that's going to differ quite a lot, of course. Now, that was it for this part. We're going to move over to the next section real quick. That is going to cover the target tag.